ജിയോ ടോക്ക്. ആ ജിയോ ടോക്ക് ഇന്ന് ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ നമുക്കറിയാം, ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ ചർച്ച ചെയ്യപ്പെടുന്ന ഒരു സംഗതിയാണ് നമ്മുടെ ഭൂമിശാസ്ത്രം. ആ ഭൂമിശാസ്ത്രത്തെ കൂടുതൽ ചർച്ചകൾക്കും സംവാദങ്ങൾക്കും വിധേയമാക്കുകയും അത് സമകാലിക പ്രസക്തമായിട്ടുള്ള വിഷയങ്ങളെ ഏതൊക്കെ തരത്തിൽ കാണാനും ഏതൊക്കെ തരത്തിൽ വായിച്ചെടുക്കാനും നമുക്ക് സാധിക്കാൻ കഴിയും എന്നുള്ള പുതിയ ഒരു ആലോചനകളും അന്വേഷണങ്ങളും ഒക്കെ തന്നെ ഈ ഒരു വെബിനാറിൽ നിന്നുണ്ടാകുമെന്ന് തന്നെയാണ് പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കുന്നത്. എല്ലാ ആളുകൾക്കും കൃത്യമായിട്ടുള്ള ഈ ഒരു ജിയോ വെബിനാർ സീരീസിലേക്ക് മുഴുവൻ ആളുകളെയും ക്ഷണിക്കുകയാണ്.
എല്ലാവർക്കും നമസ്കാരം. നമ്മള് ഭൂമിശാസ്ത്രത്തിന്റെ ശരിക്കും പുതിയ ഇടങ്ങൾ തേടിയുള്ള ഒരു യാത്രയാണ് യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു നമ്മുടെ ഈ വെബിനാർ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. അങ്ങനെ ഈ ഭൂമിശാസ്ത്രത്തിന്റെ പുതിയ ഇടങ്ങൾ തേടിയുള്ള ഈ യാത്രയിൽ ഇന്ന് നമ്മോടൊപ്പം വളരെ സ്പെഷ്യൽ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ഗസ്റ്റ് ആണുള്ളത്. ഫ്രം ജർമ്മനിയിലെ ലീബിൻ സെന്റർ ഫോർ ലാൻഡ്സ്കേപ്പ് റിസർച്ചിലെ സയന്റിസ്റ്റായ ഡോക്ടർ ധന്യ വിജയൻ. അവരാണ് ഇന്ന് നമ്മുടെ ഈ വെബിനാറിൽ മുഖ്യ പ്രഭാഷണം നടത്തുന്നത്. 2011 യങ് ജോഗ്രഫേഴ്സ് അവാർഡ് നേടി 2014 ജർമ്മൻ ചാൻസലർ ഫെലോഷിപ്പ്. നമുക്കറിയാം ജർമ്മൻ ചാൻസലർ ഫെലോഷിപ്പ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് വളരെ പ്രസ്റ്റീജിയസ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു മെറിറ്റാണ്, ഒരു അവാർഡാണ്. അത് നേടി തുടർന്ന് 2019 പോസ്റ്റ് ഡോക്ടറേറ്റ് ഫെലോഷിപ്പ് തുടങ്ങി നിരവധി ഒരുപാടുണ്ട്. സമയപരിധി മൂലം നമ്മളത് കുറയ്ക്കുന്നു. ഒരുപാട് ദേശീയ അന്തർദേശീയ അംഗീകാരങ്ങൾ നേടിയ ഡോക്ടർ ധന്യ വിജയൻ ആണ് ഫോറസ്റ്റ് ആൻഡ് ഇൻഡിജിനസ് കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റീസ് എന്ന വിഷയത്തെക്കുറിച്ച് ഇന്ന് നമ്മളോട് സംസാരിക്കുന്നത്. ഡോക്ടർ ധന്യ വിജയനെ എല്ലാ ആദരവോടും സന്തോഷത്തോടും കൂടി ഞാൻ നമ്മുടെ വെബിനാറിലേക്ക് ഹൃദയപൂർവ്വം സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുന്നു. നന്ദി.
ഹായ് എവ്രിവൺ. അപ്പൊ ഇന്നത്തെ ടോപ്പിക് forest and indigenous communities, but I am going to specify more on indigenous culture. So what is indigenous people? So we all know that the indigenous communities are like distinct societies and communities. So the land on which they live, and so they will not displaced from that area. So they will depend on the natural resources available there, and they will have personal identities like which tribal group or indigenous communities or clans like that. And they will have distinct cultures, and they will, as I said, they will depend on the natural resources for their livelihoods, and they seldom go out or will depend on the other source of income. And the culture is like any human societies will have norms or behaviors, or they will have the traditional knowledge, and they will have distinct belief like customs. All these can be categorized as culture. But we all know that the geography has really a great influence on the culture of the people. So imagine if a person is living in forest area, then they will use more forest producers. They will have like sometimes they will worship trees, and sometimes they will even see nature as God. But if the person is living near coastal or like river area, then they will more focus on fishing, or like they will have more diet with fishes and like that. So they will be knowing swimming, and they will we know that even in Kerala coast, like people are worshipping sea as a god. So the culture is really indebted to the place which they are living. Even in the rural areas, the people will be more in traditional in nature. They will have certain beliefs. Even in Kerala, we know about the sacred groves, or like all those things which will be we can more see in the rural regions. But when we go to urban regions, we can see a mixture of culture, because the urban area is an accumulation of many people from different regions. So there we can see a mixture of culture. And then how the forest and indigenous culture are correlated. So as I said, in the forest, in any indigenous communities will have a personal identity. For example, in Kerala, we can see that Malapandaram or Adia or Paniya, like that, different communities in Kerala. So they will have a personal identity of identity, and they will be knowing so much about their natural resources, because a tribal who is living within the forest, they will be more aware about the forest. They will be more aware about the land and the water resources, and they will have real cultural expressions like some kind of folk dance, or like traditional music, or tree worshipping, etc. And also they will have really values, beliefs and norms. They will have the social structure. So we all know that like many indigenous communities will have for example chief or a movement, or like they will have this hierarchical structure within them, or and they will always act as within a group, and they will depend on the forest for their livelihoods. And this picture shows one traditional dance from Ugandan tribes, and the second picture is the resources they collected from the forest, the tribal communities from Odisha. And so if we come to Kerala, okay, in India, there are more than 700 distinct tribal communities. But as per the constitution, like there are, or like the scheduled tribes, it's nearly about 645 groups. But actually, even there are unscheduled tribes within India. And in India, in Kerala, almost 35 tribal communities are living, and more than nearly 30,000 families, and within 791 tribal settlements. Also, these tribal communities are spread over 33 forest divisions. So these pictures are from different communities in Wayanad. The first one is from Pania group, the second one is from Kurchia, and this one is from Adia group. So yeah, this map some of you may be familiar with. So this map shows is from Achankoval Highlands. So the dark green is under natural forest and the lighter greens under forest plantations. So as I said before, the culture of a tribal group mostly depend on the forest. So when these forests are being converted to natural forest plantations or into other land use groups, then they are losing their habitat, they are losing their dependency over the forest. So this shows the temporal changes in area under forest within four forest ranges. So we can see in 1978 the maximum area was under natural forest, nearly 80%. But when it comes to 2016, it's only nearly 30%. But the teak plantation that is shown in dark brown color, it was 15% in 1978, but it has increased to 61% by 2016. So we can see within 4 decades, there has been tremendous conversion of natural forest to forest plantations. So, but then what is the impact of this forest conversion of livelihoods of indigenous communities? Because if you see the indigenous communities, like most of the, like nearly 58% of them depends on nomadic gathering, like they are collecting forest producers, and rest of them working within forest plantation. So what is nomadic gathering? Like they are going to the forest and they're collecting different producers from the forest. So they usually used to operate as a group, like they will form like 8 to 10 groups, and then they will go within the forest. Then they will stay up to 2 months or up to 3 months until the season ends. So then they used to collect as a group. They used to collect products as a group, and then they used to divide the income among them equally. Okay, but what happened to their operational area? This blue color is of one settlement, and this shades for another settlement. So in 1970, we can see this both settlement had different operational area. But when it comes to 1990, there we can see like an overlap within their area of operation. And in 2015, they do not have distinct operation area, but only one operation area. So you can see how much it differs from 1970s to 2015. So there comes the tragedy of commons. So what is tragedy of common? So you can see, like this is an exam, this is a portrait showing that. So this is a piece of land. There we used to have like 3 goats there. Then the population increases, then we have more goats, and then again population density again increases. So this piece of land was only enough to serve this number of population. But when the population increases, still the land area remains same, but you can see the resources also depletions. But when the number of population is increasing, then nobody is getting enough to feed them. So, but in this case, this is that area. Like they used to have enough resources before, which again goes declined and declined. Now they have only this much resources. But then what happened to this area? All these areas were being converted to forest plantations. So in the theory, like any of the things can influence the decline in resources, like population increase or what. But in this case, what influences is our policies. Like if we have good policies to control the expansion of forest plantation or to control the reduction of natural forest, then it wouldn't have happened. And then this diagram shows the area, the duration of collection of forest produces by tribals. We can see this mostly this season is in summer season. Only few products they are collecting throughout the season. And then impacts of forest conversion, because as we said before, there has been considerable decrease in the natural forest. So obviously the number of forest products they used to collect were decreased from 29 to 19, and only except for products, almost every product declined by 50%, and almost 9% products are totally absent now. So if you see this graph, it shows the distances traveled by both groups during different times. So the blue graph shows the distance used to travel by the tribals in 1970, and the 2015 showed in brown color. So you can see how much distance they have to travel more by now. So definitely when the distance increase, when the resources decreases, then definitely they will have to quit the traditional way of forest produce collection. And then what is happening? This means this itself is resulting in loss of nomadic culture. So they were practicing nomadic gathering, but now it doesn't exist. And then they don't have chief. So this was a news from today's newspaper from Attapadi. So their chief killed by a wild elephant. But in this Malappandaran communities, they no longer have a chief. But they used to say that they had chief 2 decades before, but when the resources got depleted and then the dependency on the forest reduced, and even the structure itself has been changed, and they don't have a chief now. And even they started to conflict with the officials as well as among the peers. So when the resources decreases, everybody will have a competition among them. So it increased conflict among the peers. And also they lost the responsibility to protect the forest. So before they used to have feel they own the forest. They used to have a feeling of responsibility to protect the forest. But now when the rules changed, when the laws changed, then it reduced their responsibility and also increased the exploitation of the forest. So naturally, when the people who are determined to protect the forest, when they started to exploit, then it again increases the crisis. And also they do not have much interaction with the forest officials. So the forest officials, they are unable to convey their rules and regulations to the tribals. And also one of the great advantage of the being living in the forest is that they used to have the traditional forest knowledge, like how much time it will take to replenish a forest, or like what are the biodiversities related to different regions, something like that. So, but now there is a drastic reduction in traditional forest knowledge. So even there are many studies that prove that when the biodiversity declines, the traditional knowledge of indigenous communities also may decrease. And then the change in source of income. So the change in source of income means once they used to completely dependent on the forest, but now their dependency changed of forest plantation. But even though it's only considered as change in source, but still it is underlying reason is change in culture too, because once they used to practice nomadic culture, but now they are more practicing settled life, and it results in their way of living and way of doing activities. So while they used to practice nomadic culture, then they always operated within group. So they always have much sharing among them, and to tackle every issues as a group. So they always face conflicts with wildlife or attacks from wildlife. So in order to save from these attacks, they need to operate as a group. But now no longer it is required as it was required before. And so, but when we have all this cultural change, we always look into global examples, like whether we have global examples to follow. But in reality, we don't have any examples. So the tribals were the victims of any change. We all know that when the Europeans were migrated to in North India, North America, the first thing they did was killing of Red Indians. It is the same case of Aborigines for the Australia. So when the colonialization started, the first thing they tried to do was to extinct the Aborigines, even though still there are Aborigines left within the Australia, but they were undergone several brutal massacres. And when we look into Brazilian Amazon, we know that Amazon is always mentioned as lungs of earth. So in Brazilian Amazon itself, there are like 160 different tribal societies, and they speak more than 195 languages. So in Brazil, almost 62% of area is under forest. But the current president, that is Bolsonaro, he wants to reduce the forest area to 50%. So he thinks only 50% of forest is required to meet the required. So between 2015 and 2018 alone, almost 7,900 square kilometers were deforested. So we know that even the Palakkad district is less than 5,000 square kilometers. So almost double Palakkad, if you see, almost that much area is depleting within a year. And every year they have a reduction in forest, nearly 6,000 square kilometers. And if you look into Indonesia, again, Indonesia is another victim that is reducing area under forest because of the large-scale conversion to palm plantation. So Indonesia is a major leading exporter of palm oil within the globe. So in order to increase the area under palm, they are converting the natural forest area to palm cultivation. So these photos are like within the forest, how they are converting this area, mainly through slash and burn and also through cutting down the trees. And then this is a Sami community in Europe. So we always think that Europe have greater policy to conserve their indigenous community. So it's only only one community within the whole Europe. So they are located in the northern European region, especially in Norway, Finland, Sweden, and in Russian region. But still, they are also at the verge of extinction almost. So their language is almost lost, and even the livelihoods. So, but the EU has a policy to protect all the indigenous communities and forests throughout the world. So they always pay attention to every aspect, everything which is happening all throughout the world. So when in Brazil, when the large-scale deforestation happened, EU was the first one to react, and they withdrawn all the investment which they used to give for the conservation of Amazon. And that was the case in Africa. So when the Africa is undergoing deforestation, and still but when it happens within Europe, they really do not respond to that issues. Even in Germany, there are examples like, Germans are always concerned about what is happening in the other countries, and they are always talk about biodiversity conservation, need to protect elephants, etc. But when there is an increase in wolf population or like deer population, which eats their crops, then there's a season in which they can kill these animals. So they're concerned about how to protect the resources outside the world, outside the country, but when it happens within their realms, their policy is different. So we have no examples to follow. And then there are again fights for the fights by the indigenous communities to protect their culture. So these images, one from the Sentinel Island in the Andaman and the one from the Brazil. So as I said about the history of Gotal massacre, so but later on these indigenous communities are fighting to protect their culture. So we all know that about the Sentinel Islands. So whoever intrude to their island, they will kill them. So even in last year, there was an example like an American was going to Sentinel Island to convert for the missionary work, and then they brutally killed him. And they have like even different indigenous knowledge. For example, during tsunami time, the Sentinel Islands were one of the worst hit islands, but still none of the tribal people got killed because they have, when the sea withdraws, they know it's something bad going to happen, and they tend to withdraw to the in the interior islands because nobody got killed. And even in the Amazon, like there's large scale forest conversion to in favor of miners and timber exporters. So even these tribals are protecting against their rights, and they are protecting to save the forest area. So last year was the one of the tribal leaders of this indigenous communities got killed, and these pictures were from the protest. So they are also trying to save their community. And during this forest fire during the Australia in 2019-20, and there were again protests from Aborigines because these Aborigines, they really know how to manage the forest fire. But the modern technologies they think the modern technologies is not that capable enough to manage the forest fire. So the Aborigines, they used to like make controlled forest fire because in the dry season, all the we know that all the undergrowth, especially the grass, gets dry, and when some, especially in Australia, it is called bushfire. So all these bushes get dry, and then a fire happens, it will destroy whole forest. But these Aborigines used to do the controlled fire. Like they will only burn the bushes, but they will save all the trees and wildlife. And even in India, we could see the Narmada Bachao Andolan, where the tribals were in the forefront to protect their area. So now in the world, what we see is that there's not government is not taking any governments, or like there's no concrete initiatives to conserve the tribals or conserve the. Even in India, we can see that there are like so many wildlife sanctuaries, like national parks, or for even in for lion. That's all good, but there's nothing to conserve this indigenous communities. Even when the forest conversion happens, as like animals, even the indigenous communities are losing their area under forest, and they're losing their habitat, and then they have to shift their livelihoods, and they have to shift their livelihoods to some other sources, and it also changes their culture. But still, none of the nations is seeing this aspect as an important issue to be addressed. For example, UN is an international organization, like even the NGOs like Greenpeace or WWF. So their initiatives are not enough to conserve these indigenous communities within different parts of the world. And then as the interaction between forest and indigenous communities, we cannot able to quantify it. So most of the things are qualitative in nature. So because how their norms have changed, or how their way of life has changed over time, we will not be able to quantify or measure it. So while doing research, it's not possible to find a suitable method to assess these changes. So this socio-ecological system framework was proposed by Elinor Ostrom, who is the Nobel laureate in 2000, Nobel laureate, and she put forward this framework in 2009 and later modified in 2011. So it has different components like resource systems or like resource unit, governance system, actors, etc. So this is the expansion of all those things. In this address all some things as quantitatively like resource unit, so the number of units which like maybe number of trees or like the number of forest producers they used to get and the economic value of the forest, and but also the social structure, like because what was their experience or like what are the leadership or the entrepreneurship which have changed or the norms. So I just wanted to introduce this framework, and so this is one of the best framework to understand the human and natural interaction. And so my conclusion, like, yeah, the first thing is that it is required to map the natural forest, because all forests are not natural forests. Some of them are plantations. Because as I said, in India, the forest classification system is much broader. Like they include all the forest that has more than 10-meter canopy and which is half hectare area. So, but it includes all plantations, and the forest classification system is not effective in India. So there should be a scheme to map all the natural forest, and then even the operational areas of indigenous community should be mapped. So this map shows, this map provides this operational area of 2 tribal communities. So like that, and there should be a scheme to map the operational area of tribal communities, and then with using this map in future, like even with the satellite images, we can assess if there was any changes within these operational areas. And also the tracking of products, like the tracking of products is is relatively newer concept now. That's like even for each product, the companies will track the source and the origin of these products and how it was produced and how it from where it came, how it came, like that. So then the user will have an understand whether it was a result of a deforestation or exploitation, like that. So the tracking of products should be everywhere. And then the forest policies to ensure tribal culture, ensure preservation of tribal culture. As I said, there are so many policies to protect wild animals or like forest or national parks, etc. But there are no concrete policies to preserve the tribal culture. And also the best solution is not to provide alternative livelihood options. So when the livelihood of a tribal or the indigenous communities get deteriorate, then definitely the government or like any governing body, they will come with a solution to provide an alternative solution. But that is not the solution. But instead, there should be policies to frame and ensure their dependence on forest. So in future too, they should be able to depend on the forest, because when in Achinkovan highlands, especially the Malapandar communities, they do not like to work within plantation, but they rather prefer to depend on forest, but they are able to do so there because there are not enough natural forest area. So there should be policies to conserve their area, but instead providing alternative livelihoods. So the preservation of natural forest is crucial not only for the sake of environmental sustainability, but also for the protection of tribal population. Tribal population means their livelihoods, their knowledge, their indigenous culture. So it's like a heritage. So when we protect the forest, then the indigenous culture will be saved. And when we protect the indigenous culture, then that will also reciprocate the same, like they will protect the forest. As far when they have the feeling of ownership, then they will tend to protect the natural forest. So that's all. Thank you.